Hello everybody, welcome back to Theje's YouTube. I'm your host Joel Michael, and what I have these days is way too much time on my hands thanks to being placed on unpaid leave on behalf of the Macarena. So what I thought I'd do with my free time is rebuild my prized desktop computer, aptly named Fayde Reau, after my 12-tone symphony that I composed a number of years ago. Click on the banner in the top right if you would like to listen to it. As you can see, the wiring in Fayde Reau has always been a bit of a mess. I never bothered much with cable management or I/O shields since I started building desktop PCs, and I think the performance of my CPU has been suffering all this time because of a lack of airflow. Plus, now that I'm home all day and I have to look at the damn thing, I thought I'd take the opportunity to take it apart, clean it up, and redo the wiring to see if my temps will drop and free up some headroom for more overclocking potential. Let's begin. The first step is the easiest, just blast it out with canned air and watch the dust fly. I only do this annually, which isn't enough, so it's good to start with this step. Then, out come the front panel wires and the power to the mighty GTX 1070 GPU, followed by the motherboard's power connector. The graphics card gets removed next, which is held up well, but one of the fans does grind to a halt when it stops, so it makes a noise like an old school hard drive about once every 3 to 5 seconds. Thanks, Gigabyte. Now the computer can easily lay on its side so that the motherboard can be unscrewed. Since I'm going through all this trouble, there's no reason why not to repaste the CPU and heatsink. It's been a year since I installed the Noctua NHU-12A heatsink and fans after all. Fun fact, an image of the CPU fan's exoskeleton has been imprinted on the NHU-12A's heatsink, and it's not easy to clean. The thermal paste wipe job can be started with a regular tissue, but it better be finished with isopropyl alcohol and a microfiber or shop towel. After sufficiently buffing the CPU, the I/O shield will certainly not be forgotten this time around, and I was very lucky to still have it after all these years. When the CPU is reseated, the thermal paste can be applied. That's probably a little too much to be honest, especially after that last dab. Fortunately, the U12A is a super easy heatsink to install and screw in, just gotta make sure that the directional heat pipe orientation is facing away from the memory as shown. When installing the fans, I prefer to attach both of them to the CPU and forgo the use of a rear case fan. Don't forget to plug them both in. One fan might have to go to a different spot to make room for a front system fan. With that business done, the motherboard is ready to go back into the case. The Seasonic 650-watt power supply inside Fayde Reau is a hybrid modular design with the most necessary cables attached to the PSU by stock, with room to add cables for additional internal items. After years of adding and subtracting parts and cables, it's nice to be able to revisit and optimize this part of the setup. By the end of the process, I was able to subtract one of these from the final build. Starting with the motherboard power connector, this time it's going to snake back behind the case using these nifty cutouts and pop in right where it plugs into the MOBO. These front panel connectors, while bright and colorful, will be hidden as much as possible by also inserting them into the back and popping out the bottom to plug into their appropriate spots, which are always very tedious to find. I've long since lost the instructions for this part. Fortunately, the internet is wealthy in knowledge pertaining to motherboard documentation. I don't know how I ended up with a triple-headed SATA power cable, but I'm sure glad I had one for the extra 2TB storage drive and DVD-RW and Blu-ray drives. By the way, watching me connect these was cringe-worthy footage, so be glad it's been omitted. While I would have greatly preferred shoving my two 512GB SATA SSDs in the back and leaving them there for the world to not be able to see, the nature of the double-headed SATA power cable would not have allowed such a measure, so shoved back into their little cubby at the front of Fayde Reau, they shall go. This mess was unfortunately unavoidable, as the non-modular PCI Express power cable for the video card is double-headed, and the CPU power cable for the motherboard wasn't long enough to snake around, so it still had to be draped over the GPU. When it's all said and done though, I think I did a pretty good job, especially for a lower spec system that still has 2 optical drives, an old spinner storage drive, and 2 clunky SATA SSDs. Compared to what it was before, this should give me a little bit lower overall temps and let the automatic OC settings on the motherboard clock the i7-4770K a little bit higher than it did before. So without diving into any settings, let's go ahead and fire up my Fayde Reau and run the same benchmarking programs to see what the difference is. Well, apparently Witcher 3 is showing about the same number of frames, maybe a few less. I'll chalk that up to a margin of error, especially looking at the Tomb Raider benchmark. These are GPU-leaning games, so any factor could be at play for letting frame rates get a little bit lower than they were before, especially fresh thermal paste that has yet to settle in, so the temps might be a smidge higher than they were before, making the motherboard reduce the clock speed oh so subtly for the time being. On the other hand, these 3D Mark tests show that while the graphical performance has declined a little bit, the physics tests, which are 100% CPU reliant, show remarkable improvement, and the overall scores did increase a wee little bit. I'll have to investigate this phenomenon in a later video. These results are certainly intriguing, but hey, one thing is for sure, the rig looks a lot better than it used to. This has been a presentation featuring my main workhorse desktop, Fayde Reau. For further developments regarding my desktop rig, visit my Facebook page, the link in the description below. Thanks for watching, and you guys, have a good night.